Good morning, and the oldest disc jockey in captivity. Welcome you to Viewpoint, along with our co-host, Loyd Kirby, this morning. Program of personalities, politicians, and perspectives. We have all three. These gentlemen have agreed to take some busy time and share their thoughts with us. So, Loyd, interview our guests this morning.
All right. Well, representatives of the local law enforcement community, we've got Logan County Sheriff Mark Landers, as well as Lincoln Police Chief Matt Vlahovich, stopping by and talking all things law enforcement with us for the next 45 minutes.
You know, it kind of gives me personal pride and pleasure, because in a way, I've kind of watched these kids grow up, in a matter of speaking, and I take great pride and pleasure in presenting to you your chief of police and our Logan County Sheriff. Let's just open the sidebar up, gentlemen. Let's take Sheriff first. Sheriff, I asked off air if we had enough staffing, and the immediate answer was no. You want to expand on that a little bit, sir?
Yeah, currently our patrol shifts are full, but we're short on correctional officers and dispatchers. It's getting tougher to fill these positions. The applicant pool has shrunk significantly from when Chief and I, started out. We used to fill gymnasiums of kids and young people that wanted to be police officers, that wanted to get into the criminal justice field, and those days are over. We're now all vying for the same applicant pool. It really has been a challenge, especially these last 3 years.
That would be the same answer you would give, Chief Vlahovich?
Absolutely. In fact, last night at City Council, I had to take to the committee of the whole meeting to get placed on the voting agenda for next week to hire 4 more officers. So we're still down, and but have been for over a year.
Pretty difficult to arrange staffing. There's still, the sun still comes up and goes down, and there's people out on the street every day, and some people ought not to be on the streets, perhaps. We like to think that being in a smaller community, we might be insulated from some of the places like Decatur and Bloomington, Springfield, the larger communities. Perhaps that's not so. What is your daily exposure to possibilities of problems?
I think people get lost thinking that crime, that major crime, is kind of isolated to large urban areas. That's completely not the case. While Lincoln and Logan County are relatively smaller rural communities, our crime rates are increasing. The rate of burglaries and thefts and crimes against person are all on the rise. The jail population, unfortunately, is at capacity, and crime's not going down. If you look at the national trend, it's increasing, and some of these new laws that are coming down the pike, while we agree that there's a need for criminal justice reform, for more training for officers, it's got to come with funding, and there's no one-size-fits-all for law enforcement. What applies to Cook County does not apply to Logan County, and I think what's happening right now is they're trying to just kind of shove a solution into a small round hole that's not designed for the peg they're trying to put in it.
Mr. Kirby, I want to emphasize that here in Lincoln, Logan County, we might think we're insulated from possible danger and so forth. But the fact of the matter is that any time a deputy or a city policeman stops a car, there's a need to be exceptionally alert. Am I correct in that?
Absolutely.
Vigilant.
I have a young friend who's a deputy sheriff in Sangamon County, and he had an experience once that kind of raised my hair up when he explained it. So we have to understand that even a little duffer like me who gets stopped for driving with an expired license, I could be dangerous.
We try to train our young people, our young deputies and police officers, that there is no such thing as a routine traffic stop. You don't know the reason that person may be speeding. You don't know, as a deputy's going to serve just a subpoena or a summons at a residence, you don't know what's occurred at that residence prior to your arrival, and all of a sudden they see a uniformed deputy show up at the door. That person who's just leaving, having committed a crime and stopped by a city police officer for a failure to signal or a tail light being out, doesn't know that's the reason for the stop, and that tends to escalate quickly, and that's why these young officers have to be trained to be prepared for those eventualities. There was a prime example of, the Decatur here recently that had an officer-involved shooting where that was the case, where it escalated really quickly.
648-5510. Our guest this morning, Sheriff Mark Landers and Chief of Police Matt Vlahovich. Now, here's your chance to talk to your law enforcement officers, folks. Be very kind to them because they'll find us. But seriously, no, I don't want to be facetious about that at all. Here's a chance to ask questions. You may have a legitimate question, and call in, and they'll do their best to answer your questions. As we opened the program this morning, gentlemen, I got the very immediate impression that staffing is a real problem. You're understaffed now, and your pool that you can go to replace is not as large as it should be. Am I correct in that?
That's correct.
That's correct.
How do we go about solving the available pool? I presume that pay and so forth are commensurate with reasonable wages in the community, perhaps a little better. But how do you go about filling the pool?
Go ahead.
So what happened here in the last 3 years, obviously, that our profession, law enforcement, has kind of come under attack, nationally, as far as the actions of a very few have kind of been used to judge the profession as a whole. And then, obviously, pay is a significant benefits are a significant draw to young people that want to do this job. We're going back to when Matt and I started. I mean, I started this profession at $18,500 a year. That was my starting salary.
That's exactly where I started.
So, is that right?
Yeah.
18.5.
So yeah, so it's come a long way, and I would credit my predecessor. I'm sorry.
I'd like to think it's come a long way.
It has. It's come a long way now. The city, we're constantly competing for resources, so county typically does not pay as much as a city and municipality police department. So that tends to create some friction between agencies, not just ours, but others, where you're kind of drawing from their pool of officers and then you're having to recruit. We went through this a few years ago where we were constantly recycling and having to get new deputies in because they were moving on to and Matt fights the same thing, whether it's through the state police taking and drawing our guys or not. But we've, with this new law coming down the pike, I know that the sheriff's office is going to need additional personnel. We've, lost a couple deputies in the past year, couple years. We're trying to replace those two positions in order to keep more deputies on the street. But when you look at the county, we have 3 deputies assigned to each patrol shift. When you account for vacation and training and sick days, I mean, we're fortunate to have 2 deputies working the entire county. And that's a significant geographical space to patrol for 2 deputies. So if they're tied up, say for instance in Latham, on a call, whether that's a domestic battery call or whatever, then you've got those 2 deputies tied up on a service call, then the rest of the county lacks that patrol function. So that's the reason for needing additional personnel. The county deserves it, and I know the community wants it.
And we're not, just because we pay a little bit better than what the county sheriff's office does, we're not immune to this national trend, and it just started here within the last 18 months. It's just a sentiment nationally that the applicant pool is shrinking. We're all vying for the same people, good people, and it's boiling down to recruitment and retention, and what can we do? What kind of tools do we have to recruit and then retain people? Just this year, I've had several leave for better paying jobs. and one youngster who just went to the Illinois State Police because they pay better, and that will continue.
Jay, speaking of recruitment and so forth, this station also runs on recruitment of sponsors. So we're going to take a few minutes now and pay a resection for our sponsors. Go right ahead, James.
And we're back on the Viewpoint program, 217-648-5510, the number to call. If you have questions or comments for our guests, guests in the studio today are Logan County Sheriff Mark Landers and Lincoln Police Chief Matt Vlahovich. We were talking before the break about staffing issues and having to fill positions. On average, like if you have an opening on your staff, how long does it take from the time that opening becomes available to recruiting and advertising and going through the background check and then hiring someone into that position? Like roughly, I'm sure it varies a little bit, but is it a 6-week process, 6-month process?
We just went through this process. We just finished a testing cycle for new hires and laterals. So the application process was running through the summertime. So we get a list of, a list of viable candidates, and then they have to take the test. Once they take the test and have applied and all the documents are certified per se, we establish that list, and now if there are openings, which we have, they'll have to go through an extensive background check, pre-employment testing, which is psychological, polygraph, and health and medical. Once they pass all of that, then they'll be offered a job, but we have to wait on the academy to start. The next academy doesn't start until January, and the state of Illinois just increased the academy from 14 weeks to now 16 weeks starting in 2023, so that's 4 months. And when they graduate from the academy, they come back for at minimum a 12-week field training period. So you're, from the time the guy or the person, guy or gal, takes the test to the time that they're actually ready to be counted as a full-fledged officer, what's called on solo patrol, you can just simply call it a year.
I think that's what a lot of folks don't understand is that that hiring process is, we can't lower the standard, obviously. The process has to continue regardless of the pool of applicants. Day not going to lower, because you don't want ethical issues or integrity issues. Those all have to be taken into account, but it is from the day they're hired and start the academy until they're in a squad car by themselves actually performing a job is 7 months.
My goodness.
Yeah. There's a lot of man hours put into the training process, not only at the academy, but once they get back and they're put into a car with field training officers, then they have to evaluate how they've, acclimated to the career, and then show them not just the overall police work requirements, but now what's specific to each agency. County and city are very different. We have different duties and responsibilities. Law enforcement, both of us have, but county also has a responsibility as officers of the courts. So we're responsible for maintaining the jail as well as serving process, summons, subpoenas, things of that, documentation that comes from the courts, including evictions and things of that nature. So there's
protection.
Yep, a lot of different things that the county deputies are required to learn and be trained on.
You mentioned a rather unusual figure to me, Loyd. 7 months is a long time. 648-5510. This is your opportunity this morning to if you have a question, Sheriff Mark Landers and Chief Matt Vlahovich will be very happy to do their best to give you a straightforward answer. This is don't think of this as Andy Griffith and Don Knotts. This is a real professional operation.
Yeah, which one's which?
I'll take Don.
All right.
Seriously, I have great respect. And by the way, I have to tell you a quick story about being traffic stops and so forth. A long time ago, I knew the sheriff in DeWitt County, and I've even forgotten the gentleman's name now. And I made a left turn where I should not have made a left turn over in DeWitt County. And sure enough, there he came. And so while I'm sitting there, and I said, by the way, how's the sheriff? And I mentioned him by name. He said, you know him? And he says, I said, yes. And he kept right on writing. That didn't work a bit.
Didn't work.
That didn't work.
I said, tell him I'm doing a good
So
job.
I said to self, don't ever try that again. Have there been any lighter moments that you might recall in a matter of police work, gentlemen?
Lighter moments?
Yes, any lighter moments. And I suspect they're few and far between.
None that can be discussed on air, but no,
Yeah.
this profession, it does create a closeness between the folks that work it, because you come to see a lot of things in this line of work that the general public doesn't see, and the violence and the hurt and the pain that's created through crimes of violence and things like that. So inside the squad rooms and inside the police stations, there's a lot of joking and ribbing between even between agencies, because this guy, anyway, it's a good time. But you learn to trust the guys that you're working with. And we have a great working relationship, our two agencies. A lot of us have come up together and worked back in the road together. What's concerning now, and one of the things that I hope we get an opportunity to talk about briefly, is this new law that's going to take effect January 1st, this so-called Safety Act. And there's a lot of concerns there for us as law enforcement administrators, and for what's going to take place in our communities and with our folks, with our employees, and how that's going to affect them.
Well, why don't we get into it then? The
Okay.
Safety Act coming up. I noticed before the show, when I was doing some research, there was a letter put out by the Logan County State's Attorney, as well as by you two folks, Sheriff Landers and Chief Vlahovich, about the Pre-Trial Fairness Act and how it's going to impact law enforcement, and how it sort of did away with a lot of the progress that was made through the Bail Reform Act of 2017. What was that 2017 Act? What progress did it make, and how is this new Safety Act going to impact
Can I
that?
answer that?
You go right ahead. Yeah.
Pass this ball back and
All right.
forth over the net.
They claim that it did a lot of good, but what it did is it cut a lot of the funding. They said that it made the bonds and the fines and the court things more equitable across the way, and I think some of that was needed. I don't want to speak to the courts, obviously, but what they did during this latest round of negotiations, this law was multiple laws. It was being worked on. There was a conglomeration of law enforcement professionals with the Illinois Association of Chiefs of Police, the Illinois Sheriff's Association, the Attorney General's office. They were all working together to get that language crafted that would have made criminal justice reform progressive here in Illinois. And then politicians got involved and started just cramming language, and it was going for, if you guys recall those images from TV and how the state legislators acted and behaved. Even now today, now that, 100 of the 102 state's attorneys in this state do not agree with this act. There are that many. Yeah, when you have that kind of consensus among our prosecutors, never mind, take law enforcement, take the police chiefs and the sheriffs out of it, the prosecutors are telling you that this law is bad. It's not going to be a good thing for our communities. Hopefully, there's a trailer bill that's going to be coming up in veto session, and veto session obviously is going to happen after the election. They don't want to talk about this stuff before the election. But after the election, there's going to be a veto session, and there's a trailer bill that's coming up to hopefully fix a lot of these issues. We'll see. It takes a supermajority to do that. Well, you've got such polarity inside that House there in Springfield that I'm not sure you're going to get 2/3 of those folks to agree on anything, whether the sky's blue or not. So it's going to be a tough road to hoe for sure.
I'm not optimistic about it whatsoever, but we're going to forge forward. The word we're getting from Springfield and out of Springfield is it's just going to simply take effect. The bail reform portion of this bill is going to take effect January 1st, and then try to fix it. Well, that's too late, obviously. Anybody with any common sense knows that.
What they've done is they've tied the hands. There's two models that they've looked at here. There's the New York model, and if you look at any given day at the news, you'll see what's going on in New York. And New Jersey did something different. New Jersey took their model, and what they did is they gave the judges the discretion to detain those people who had committed crimes based on community safety. Here in Illinois, this law that they're pushing is a judge's hands are tied. Basically, there are only a certain number of detainable offenses, and they're listed out, and we have those. Everything else is not attainable, and they'll sit here. I've seen the commercials where like, that's not true. Not everybody's getting out. That is true.
Actually, they are getting
absolutely true.
You know, it's hard to wrap your mind around this business of no cash bail. And down through the years, and as many years for me, I can't think of one district attorney who wouldn't prosecute the normal way they should operate their office. I can't fathom a district attorney who, in a blatant case, when everybody knows that we've got a bad dude out here, and they don't want to prosecute
So
him.
let's go back.
I don't understand that.
Let's go back to the 2017 thing when they did a little bit of bail reform, just real quick. 2017, they took these offenses, all of our criminal statutes, and they divided them in, and you please correct me if I am mistaken on any of this, they categorized them into Category A and Category B offenses. So if you commit a Category A, you go to jail, have to see a judge to set bond, and you can't afford to pay your bail to get out of jail. For every day you spend in jail, your bond is then reduced.
By $30 a day. So
$30 a day.
for those people who maybe couldn't afford to post that $1,000 bond, they would not sit there, for certain offenses, they would not sit there indefinitely. Every day that they were incarcerated, they received $30 credit until that bond level was met, and then they would be released.
They would be correct. Now, moving forward, and through this lame duck session passed bill, those Category A and Category B offenses went by the wayside, and within the Safety Act, and Mark's got the list of, now we have what's called a list of detainable offenses, where it's incumbent upon the officer and the prosecuting attorney to deem and make their case that this person who committed this crime should be detained in jail. There's a whole slew of violent crimes that are not detainable offenses. Go ahead, Mark.
So there are 7 detainable offenses, and they're listed as forcible felonies, stalking, aggravated stalking, family or household crimes, domestic battery, aggravated domestic battery, sex offenses, gun offenses, and a high likelihood of willful flight. Sounds great, right? Sounds like, hey, we've covered the big ones, right? But here's the ones that here's some of the ones that are not detainable: kidnapping, second-degree murder, unlawful restraint, hate crime, criminal trespass to a residence, which is going to be a concern for us, right? Trespass has always been something we've been able to resolve ourselves.
Correct.
Not anymore. Some of the big ones are aggravated fleeing and eluding, motor vehicle accidents involving death or great bodily harm where they flee. Folks like that are not going to be automatically detained. As a matter of fact, the law says that without a specific threat to an individual, or that term of willful flight, which they're hoping, the state's attorneys are hoping to fix the language that's constructed around what that term actually means. Without those two things, a judge has to release that person back out with conditions, but still release.
Walking the street. Or driving the streets, as the case may be.
Right. And then to continue on, if somebody is allowed to be detained, there has to be a hearing to show that there's a continued threat, whatever that may be, and then there's a clock that starts once they've been detained of 90 days. So there's a whole mess of language in there that legislators, I really wish they would have just continued to have those conversations they were having, and instead of trying to shove that through in the dark of night the way it did with the prosecutors, the people that actually interpret the law, that are responsible for, prosecutions and determining whether or not those, and then tying the judge's hands. That was the biggest mistake that Illinois made. I don't know what we keep thinking, but there are other states that have done stuff in the past that we can sit there and look at and realize, hey, that doesn't work, or hey, that works. And specifically, these two, what we're hoping to push is that New York's model, which is what we've gone beyond New York's model, doesn't work, but New Jersey's model does. If we could just follow that path and show that the judges are there to keep the community safe, give them that discretion. Our judges are nonpartisan. They're not political creatures. They're just not. They can sit there and make an unbiased decision on the harm or threat to society and keep our community safe.
Not germane to today's conversation, but wouldn't you like to be in charge of the courtroom and that the judge is being pressed so hard to make sure that she does things legal? That idiot that drove into those people in that car, acting as his own attorney. It just seems patently wrong that anybody can do that to the legal system, and yet there it is. And the judge has got to make sure that she's very careful of it so that there won't be a mistrial or whatever the results may be.
Right, because we get the statute provided to us, and that's the statute that our lawmakers created. Now it's a matter of, some of this stuff's going to be resolved in the courts, without a doubt.
And you had mentioned the trailer bill. Is that Senate Bill 4228, I'm thinking, where that was proposed by Scott Bennett, permits judges to deny pretrial release for any alleged crime if the person arrested poses a threat to the safety of anyone in the community?
Out of Champaign, right.
Okay.
Yeah, so that's the latest trailer bill coming up, and I think it's got some bipartisan support. I hope so. Like I said, though, you need 2/3, and it's going to be tough. I'm afraid that what's going to happen is that the law as it currently sits is what's going to take effect on January 1st, and it's going to be a rough road. For instance, something simple like criminal trespass is being changed from an A to a B. This new law says that if you commit a Class B misdemeanor, Class C misdemeanor, a petty offense, or a traffic violation, that you will be cited and released. That's what it says.
Pretty obviously, ladies and gentlemen, your sheriff and your chief of police have to be students of the law as well as enforcers of the law. And that's a greater part of their training, and it comes out very obviously here this morning. Is there any one thing in particular that you could have, Chief Vlahovich, that you'd like to ask for your department, budget notwithstanding?
Notwithstanding the budget?
Budget notwithstanding. What would you do? Hallelujah to start with.
Hallelujah. The best and the brightest, and for them to stay for their career.
For them to stay for their career.
Correct.
Yeah. And I would assume that would be about the same for the sheriff's department.
Yeah, the days of old where guys would come to an agency or a factory or wherever. I mean, if you look back at Lincoln's history with PPG and Lennon Fink and all those folks would go there and start their career there and work there for 30 or 40 years. Those days are gone for the most part. I think we're the last of a dying breed that, you go to an agency now, you're lucky to hold on to a new employee for 3 to 5 years. That's about all you can expect. And then the grass is greener or there's
more pay,
better pay, which you can't
better
fault
benefits.
these young folks.
No.
You can't. If they can go to another agency and make $10,000 a year more to support their family, how do you fault them for
Sure,
that?
you're going to do it.
Absolutely.
Yeah, we just had one resign in the spring that he went to a different agency and got a $25,000 a year raise.
That's significant. You can't
working
touch
from a
that.
finite budget year after year,
No way
that's
you
the
can touch
fact of the
that.
matter.
Yeah.
We can't compete with that.
No.
And I don't blame that officer.
Of course.
He's just bettering
No.
himself for
You got a
his
family.
life and his family,
What about cameras in the line of duty, gentlemen? Who wants to go first on the
I'll
camera?
let Matt take that one. He's got his on order.
We have ours on order. Within this Safety Act that was passed January, I can't remember the date, back in 2021. Depending upon the size of the municipality, there were several dates listed. Every police agency is now mandated to have and implement body-worn cameras. Ours, based on our size, the mandate wasn't until January 1st, 2025. However, we have the support of the city council and the mayor, and we worked it into the budget this year. I have gone ahead and ordered those. The reason for that is our constituents, the city council, the mayor, and our officers especially all understand that these body-worn cameras will help our officers against the frivolous complaints that are coming and have started, July 1st of 2022. So within that law, anybody can anonymously complain against an officer, and the complaint can be frivolous, it can be false, it can be without merit, and that complaint stays in that officer's file for its duration. Whereas before this bill took effect, in order to complain on an officer, a person that was making the complaint had to provide a sworn affidavit. And if that sworn affidavit was found to be false, we could then file a report with the state's attorney requesting that that person be charged with filing a false police report. Not the case anymore.
They took a situation and I think,
They fixed something that wasn't broke.
yeah, and we're not against confidential complaints. There are times where a person may feel threatened or intimidated for whatever reason, don't know, whatever the circumstances are.
Valid or non-valid.
Right, but would like to make a confidential complaint. That's fine, and that's not a problem. But these anonymous complaints that can come without any kind of support or background, and again, they stay on that officer's file forever, these body-worn cameras are going to at least give the truth, because there's no changing what actually occurred. And if that recording is there, it's there for good.
And they're expensive.
Oh.
They're very expensive,
bet.
and it's another unfunded mandate.
Which is one of our major
gigantic.
complaints. Yeah.
It puts right back on the individual communities.
Up front, I believe our upfront cost for these cameras, for 30 cameras, because we have 28 officers, and there again, the law still isn't clear on who is supposed to be wearing these at all times and who is not. I've been advised that even people like us that are in administration should be wearing them when you leave the building.
So that is a problem. It's so vague and was so poorly written, again, by these legislators that detectives, administration, corrections, these employees, who's supposed to wear them, when are they supposed to wear them, what happens. There were initially things in there where if the body camera wasn't turned on immediately, there were sanctions against officers. You know, when you're headed to a call where there's an active violent situation happening, there are times where it's going to take some, just like with every new equipment, new piece of equipment, new training is going to be required, and there's going to be time. It's so vague and it's so poorly written that hopefully the trailer bill fixes some of that nonsense that's really in there. That's going to be tough. And I want to just speak to Matt's point, these unfunded mandates. Logan County is not a wealthy county. Our county board does everything they can to manage the money properly. They're elected officials just like I am, and they're doing their best, but there's only so much in that pot. So when the state comes and says, you're going to be required to do this, and it's going to cost $75,000 to $100,000, and that doesn't include the storage, that doesn't include the redaction software necessary, that doesn't include the additional personnel that have to do it. So take one instance of a use of force issue where the video recordings have to be compiled and brought to the state's attorney's office. There may have been 5 police officers, 3 city and 2 county on that event, right? Because it was a larger event. Now you've got footage from 5 squad cars, you've got footage from 5 body cameras, along with all their reports and documentation and evidence. Somebody has to view that to redact any kind of information that's not supposed to be released to the media, to the public, to whoever. Who's doing that? Where are those personnel?
And who determines that?
Which is additional personnel.
Right. So when we say unfunded mandates, that's what we mean. And the storage alone for the, if anybody knows technology, trying to store video and audio is ridiculous, and the amount of space and storage that's needed, hopefully Motorola comes up with this, reduced.
For instance, Springfield, I think, has 220. They were up to 280. I think they're down around 220 officers. They have have already implemented body-worn cameras, but their storage fees for body-worn cameras in Springfield is $1 million a year.
That's incredible.
Correct. So you see, you
now,
understand the gravity
this is
of these.
mandated legislation that's come down by, quote, I'll be careful about this, Loyd, those who know, by quote, those who know, when really they have no cognizance of what they've mandated.
That's correct.
Body-worn cameras are a good thing.
They are.
We're not against body-worn cameras. We're trying to figure out how to pay for it, and we're still trying to keep officers on the street, correctional officers in the jail, and dispatchers in the 911 center.
With reference to equipment, what about the use of tasers, gentlemen? Are they common on the streets here in Lincoln, Logan County?
Sure.
Yes, sir.
And, of course, that requires special training to the use of them. And there again, that's another cost.
It is, and it's, again, it's just one tool that is at their discretion too. So law enforcement, obviously, use of force has been a significant topic of conversation these last few years. Officers are trained in the use of force and the escalation of the use of force from the beginning of their career, and it's constantly trained on every year. As a matter of fact, we want our police officers to be trained on use of force and the appropriate use of force. And when some of this legislation kind of addresses that as far as, intervention and having to give medical attention right after a use of force. Look, no use of force issue is ever going to look pretty on a video. It's not. If a person is refusing to comply, or if a person is literally resisting arrest or fighting with the police officer, no fight looks neat.
Right.
Doesn't look nice. They're not pretty. Tasers are just one application that allow for a police officer to just avoid all that ugly stuff. And if it rises to that level of use of force, the officers are trained when to appropriately use it, how to deploy it, and time again, it has stopped a violent encounter from escalating.
I'm sitting here thinking, Loyd, in the Mayberry days when we had a merchant policeman hired by the merchants, not the city of Lincoln as I remember, and Charlie Tiffany was the merchant policeman. He had a stick about as long as this piece of microphone equipment here, and the communication was, as he rounded the corner on Chicago and Broadway Street, if he looked down at Malloy's Restaurant, if the light was on above Malloy's Restaurant sign, he's supposed to call in. That was a communication.
That's how you knew that radio traffic was. That's radio traffic back then.
Radio traffic.
The naive days. So, I don't want to make light of this. This law enforcement today is a very, very serious, very sophisticated business, and it goes without saying, as we've already discovered this morning, these boys just aren't law enforcement officers. They're students of human nature as well, and they have to be students of what is passed out of the legislative halls, some with good intentions and some with not. So, go ahead, Loyd.
Bill, I would like to retract that last wish. I just thought of this.
Yes, sir.
If I truly had my one wish, I would train an officer. I would give a new officer the best training, which would last approximately a year, in all of the facets that we are required to deal with on a daily basis, anywhere from a stolen bicycle report to the most egregious of crimes. Train him for a year and pay him $150,000 a year with benefits. That would be my wish. And that's what's needed.
Well,
Now, that's a serious statement, folks. This comes from experience and knowledge. And so take great consolation in the fact that I'm not trying to stroke them. I'm only going to drive from here to Burtonview. So, but seriously, you folks are lucky to have the law enforcement agencies we do in this community. Go ahead, Loyd. I'm talking too much.
No,
I'm
you're
sorry.
fine. You're the star of the show, so that's how it should be. On a previous show that I'd hosted, I'd had Mayor Tracy Welch in here, and we've been talking about various aspects of his job. One of the things he pointed out is, and we've discussed, is that the role of social media today and how that has impacted what you folks do in law enforcement, and people will hop on Facebook or wherever and say, well, I just saw this happen, or I know this is happening at that particular residence. A lot of times, just because there are things allegedly happening somewhere, that doesn't mean that you folks aren't looking into it just because there isn't, a squad car present in front or whatever. How is social media and the fact that folks are sort of airing things, again, sort of like the unfounded or the anonymous complaints, putting things out there on social media about, well, I know this is happening and I know that's happening. How has that impacted what you folks do day to day?
I think that just plays to, so when cell phones and these devices, when everybody had a camera in their pocket, law enforcement officers are now expected to be the be-all and end-all of every problem that society has. We used to be law enforcement officers. That's no longer the case. Now they expect us to be crisis counselors and mental health professionals and law enforcement officers, and to come to your house because your child is out of control at 13 and expect us to fix that problem when that problem has been propagating for 13 years. Mm-hmm. I think that the body-worn cameras, as I said earlier, are a good thing. It allows a real perspective to be seen from what Monday morning quarterbacking, everybody does it, right? I mean, we all do it. We want to talk about our team. But in law enforcement, these law enforcement professionals, because that's what they are giving moments to make a split-second decision and make the right decision, and then be criticized for it for days and weeks afterwards. That's why we stress with our people training. We want more training. The legislators want to talk about all this training we need. Absolutely, we need it. We want it. As Matt said, I would put my deputies into training weekly if I could. The problem is that when you pull them off the street, there's nobody protecting the community. Mm-hmm. If I had a wish, double my agency. Give me enough people so that I can be training those who are not working while there's enough deputies working the community to protect against the thefts and the burglaries and the response to domestic batteries, which are all on the rise. Mental health issues are on the rise. This state has failed at combating mental health, and they want to just throw folks in jail and for a minor crime. They'll be in my jail sitting on a misdemeanor, and then because of the mental health issues that they have, they'll have issues inside of my jail, and that will elevate to felony. Now, a person who should have been sitting in a McFarland's getting actual treatment from medical professionals was stuck in a jail cell because of an assault, and now has multiple felonies for what occurred in the jail by either assaulting staff or doing something silly. We have a mental health crisis in this country, specifically here in Illinois, and they expect our deputies and police officers to go out there and solve it. Now they're trying to fix it with this 988 system and bring these crisis counselors in there, but quite honestly, it's such a new program, most people don't even know about it, and we're not even sure how it's supposed to really work, bringing counselors with police officers, because you start sending counselors by themselves, these folks they have mental health issues, they can flip on a dime, and it can go from, yeah, I'm talking to you and I just want some help, to now I'm upset, now I'm angry, now I'm going to hurt you. And if we're not there, what do they do?
Sure, go ahead, Matthew. Did you about to...
And back to the social media thing that Loyd
Yes, sir.
questioned about. So many times, it's a good thing. It's a good tool. My take on social media was it was supposed to be, or it was implemented and brought to light to keep people connected.
Right.
Now society is using social media to give political opinions, to give opinions against the police, and so many times things are taken out of context. They don't catch the entire event on their video used, through their phone, and then they throw it out on social media and give an opinion. Well, opinions are different than fact.
Whose thoughts, yes.
Correct.
Right.
However, because of these things and the society that we live in today, people have an expectation of knowing. I believe in transparency. You may think, or you may have an opinion on social media, you may catch a clip of an incident taking place, but that doesn't necessarily constitute its fact. When I provide the facts, it seems like some of those posts and opinions.
Listeners, I rest my case.
Yeah. One final point.
Chief of Police Matthew Vlahovich and Logan County Sheriff Mark Landers, I rest my case. We have. Be nice to them. Say something to them. Say something to them about a great job they're doing. We appreciate your time, gentlemen, very, very much. Thank you for Viewpoint. Thanks.